guard at the Residence Inn isolation site in Ottawa had tested positive for COVID-19.
Some Nunavut school districts close after a guard at a Nunavut isolation facility in Ottawa tests positive for COVID-19.
I think in light of the pandemic and the riots, all of these things really hit the ears in a different way.
And live theater returns to the stage in Winnipeg, but with a scaled back look. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson and welcome to APTN National News. There are still no cases of COVID-19 in Nunavut. A reason for that is the most Nunavut residents have spent 14 days in an isolation facility in the south before returning. Now, one of the security guards at one of those isolation sites contracted the virus, and the 24 people the guard was potentially in contact with are all back in Nunavut. Kent Driscoll brings us this from Iqaluit.
Nunavut officials called a press conference after revealing that a security guard at one of the 2 Ottawa COVID-19 isolation sites tested positive for the virus.
The guard at the Residence Inn isolation site in Ottawa had tested positive for COVID-19. After being notified, the Department of Health began working with Ottawa Public Health to assess the risk and begin contact tracing. It was determined that the risk of exposure was limited to August 18th and 19th. We have identified 24 isolation clients as being low-risk contacts, meaning that their contact with this individual was brief.
All the isolation travelers in Ottawa were bound for Baffin Island. Schools on Baffin Island started opening on August 13th. The latest opens their doors on September 4th. Considering the time period, it is possible that some of the 24 potentially exposed people are teachers. 2 school districts on Baffin Island were closed today in response to the announcement, Qikiqtarjuaq and Arctic Bay. Those 24 are being asked to self-monitor for symptoms. We asked if a teacher was one of the 24 people who were in contact with the guard, would they be allowed in a classroom? Dr. Patterson says unless they start showing symptoms, they would be allowed to teach.
We got to keep in mind that this is low risk. The odds are that most, if not all, of these people will not develop COVID-19. And if we shut down schools and workplaces for every incident like this moving forward, then we are going to do serious harm to our children, and those harms, especially for children, outweigh the benefit from being so protective.
Back in March, when Nunavut schools closed, many individual school districts had already closed their doors before the chief public health officer did it officially. That seems to be happening again. This time, the government says they're going to act more deliberately based on what they've learned from experience. Will the school districts' boards agree? Or will Nunavut's return to school be stopped, just that it has barely started? Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
It's day 40 of the occupation at what is being called the 1492 Land Back Lane. Six Nations land defenders have been on the site in Caledonia on what they say is unceded territory. Now we go to Jamie Pashagumskan for an update.
Thanks, Brittany. It's been pretty quiet here today. The land defenders have been busying themselves around the camp and continuing construction on their cabin. The OPP have stated that they will not be moving in on the injunction until their liaison team has had a chance to de-escalate the situation. If that fails, then they'll have to move in. Since reporting that on Tuesday, the liaison team hasn't been back to the camp. People here are speculating that that may be because the injunction needs to be reissued, naming Schuyler Williams as the defendant. APTN reached out to the mayor of Haldimand County and the elected chief of Six Nations for comment, but didn't hear back by deadline. Meanwhile, for the most part, the mood here has been relaxed and upbeat, but an observer has told APTN that behind every smile and behind every laugh is the fear that at any moment they could be raided. Brittany?
To northern Saskatchewan now, where a viral video from Stanley Mission shows what appears to be an RCMP officer trying to break into a house with an axe to check on a person who is in distress. APTN's Chris Stewart has the story.
Lac La Ronge Indian band member Jonas Hardlot suffers from depression, anxiety, and addiction issues. On Tuesday, he needed help. He called a family member. That member called 911, and the Stanley Mission RCMP dispatched a member. 2 health clinic staff were dispatched as well. When the RCMP officer arrived, Jonas said the officer was very aggressive after Jonas initially refused to open the door to him.
I was talking to him through the window, and my cousin woke up, and I told him I'll wait for the clinic until I open the door because of his attitude and his demeanor, I guess, was intimidating.
Jonas began recording. The video shows the officer pounding the window, demanding the door be opened.
Open the door! I'm not doing it. Open the door now!
Should I open the door? No.
The clinic is here to check on you. Open the door. I'm coming back with a sledgehammer.
I'll open the door when the clinic comes here.
And I told him straight out I'll open the door for the nurses when they get here. And he threatened to open the door with a sledgehammer, which wasn't even a sledgehammer, it was an axe. And that's when I told my cousin just to open the door before he damages my door or my window.
The video stops when the officer grabbed Jonah's cell phone. The officer and nurses left after determining that Hardlot was physically okay. Hardlot says the RCMP officer went too far.
But I didn't understand why he was acting the way he was, like his attitude and demeanor, the intimidation, I guess. But you could see he was trying to smash the window when my cousin was talking to him. It's a good thing that the window didn't smash, otherwise my cousin would have been injured also.
The RCMP Saskatchewan F Division told APTN they are investigating the incident, and the officer has been reassigned. The Lac La Ronge Indian Band released a statement. It calls the RCMP members' actions frightening and inappropriate, especially for a member believed to be in duress. The statement says they are satisfied with the reassignment of the officer and will meet with RCMP to better resolve future situations. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Exactly 3 months ago, Regis Korchinski-Paquette fell from her balcony to her death. On May 27th, 6 Toronto police officers attended a domestic disturbance at her apartment, during which an agitated Korchinski-Paquette fell. Her death triggered anti-racism protests in Toronto and other parts of Canada. But an Ontario police watchdog cleared Toronto police of any wrongdoing and found no overt racism by the officers involved. Korchinski-Paquette's sister called that conclusion disgusting. Interim Toronto Police Chief called the report a no-win for everyone involved and said a recommendation from a 2014 report that looked at encounters with police in crisis will be acted upon.
Working with the City of Toronto and using some medical health professionals to work with us to look at alternate responses. So hopefully we can have less police involvement on certain occasions, and we can have divert them to a medical professional.
Racial tensions and police shootings in the United States are now spilling into the world of professional sport. The National Basketball Association is reportedly planning to resume the playoffs, but tonight's 3 games are still postponed. That includes a game between the Toronto Raptors and the Boston Celtics. It comes after 3 games were postponed last night. The NBA is saying they hope to resume games Friday or Saturday. At the heart of it all, the police shooting of an unarmed black man in Wisconsin on Sunday. Jacob Blake was shot 7 times by police. Racial injustice has been front and center in this restarted NBA season, with players speaking out and taking action to send a message.
To our fans and communities to stand up for social justice and the effort to end racism.
And reports say tonight's NHL games are being postponed. That makes the NHL the latest major North American sports league to not play scheduled games in solidarity over the police shooting of Jacob Black. It comes as current Black NHL players like Matt Dumba and Evander Kane were disappointed by the league to hold games on Wednesday night. Federal funding for schools on First Nations is on the way, but is it too little, too late? More on that after the break. Here's Friday's weather forecast beginning on the East Coast. Sunny skies and 24 in Halifax, 23 above in Fredericton, 14 in rain in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, 14 above in La Grande River, 20 in sun in Quebec City, 22 in Montreal, 27 in rain in Toronto, cloudy and rainy, and 24 in London, 21 above in Wawa, 20 degrees in Thunder Bay in northern Manitoba, 17 in Thompson and Norway House, 22 above in Gimli, Winnipeg, and Brandon. Over to Saskatchewan, sunny skies, 23 in Regina and Swift Current, 20 above in La Ronge, 19 in Buffalo Narrows. Welcome back. The Deputy Grand Chief of the Nishnawbe-Aski Nation says federal funding announced on Wednesday is too little, too late. There are roughly 9,000 students in the 49 communities that NAN represents, and Derek Fox says the entire school year may now be in jeopardy for some students. Deputy Grand Chief Fox joins us now. Deputy Grand Chief, NAN was asking for more than $30 million to ensure a safe return to school for students. Is the funding announced by the feds earlier this week going to be enough?
No. The funding announcement is for $112 million nationwide, and that's when you consider it, that's roughly 630 First Nations across Canada. So you divide that by 112 million. When we are asking for 33 million for 49 First Nations. So that's not going to be enough for us, not nearly enough. That's not going to be enough for the First Nations across Canada either.
You said that students and educators will now be scrambling to try to prepare for classes in September. How many students do you think will miss the start of school?
Many students will miss the start of school. We don't know the exact number because the jurisdiction lies within the First Nations of our communities. It lies with the schools, the educators, and of course the leadership within those communities, and of course the parent students. So up until this point, our students and our schools are left with a decision to make come September 8th. They're going to need to decide whether they start school without any support from the government. So they'll need to either decide that or delay the start of the school year. So far, we know that some communities are delaying. Some are going to go back to school, but those who go back to school will need to dip into funds that are not there for them. So they'll be going into some of their education funds that are there due to prior education agreements prior to COVID. So they're going to go into bigger deficits using these funds that they don't have for this pandemic.
So you were pushing for this 33 million. What needs to happen to ensure all students are able to return to class safely?
Yeah, so this $33 million, it was 33 million divided by 9,000 students is roughly $3,600 per student. So that would have outlined, or that would have covered PPE gear, things like masks, sanitization supplies, the need to sanitize buses and the schools. That would have covered additional teachers, mental health support, all those things that you see in cities like Toronto and Thunder Bay and Ottawa that our school boards are receiving. So what needs to happen is that the federal government just needs to say yes to our proposals, say yes to the many proposals that are being worked on throughout the country. And they need to stop discriminating against our children and show some compassion and put themselves in the shoes of our parents and say, would you want your children going back to school in a setting that's not equipped for this pandemic?
With this in mind, how concerned are you about a possible COVID-19 outbreak, especially for those students who have to move away from home for high school?
I'm extremely concerned. There's always the possibility of an outbreak any given day at any given time. As we all know, we've learned a lot about this COVID-19, and it could pop up at any time It could cause outbreaks in any school or work setting. And the problem within the Anishinaabe Nation is that 32 of our 49 First Nations are remote. We don't have access to the health funds or the hospitals, health supports. We don't have access to the many services that are existent within our cities. So should an outbreak like this happen in our communities, we can expect to lose a lot of lives.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time and giving us your perspectives today, Deputy Grand Chief Fox.
Thank you.
We want to hear what you think. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptnnews. Also, you can follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more Indigenous news. Not all children in Quebec will be returning to school this fall, so lesson plans will look a little different. For one group of children in Montreal, a Longhouse leader turned teacher for a day is sharing lessons about the two-row wampum and the great law of peace. APTN's Lindsay Richardson was there.
Where you're looking at on the left here, to the east, this is me. This is where I am. What you know as Mohawk. Mohawk is not our name. Mohawk is made up by the Europeans. We are Ganyagahaga.
There's not a desk in sight, but today, this park is a classroom. And Stuart Mayo, who runs one of the 3 longhouses on Kahnawake Mohawk territory, is the teacher.
When you're looking at all the stars, all the planets, when you think of the sun, the moon, every planet, this is inside the body of Sky Woman. Sky Woman gave us our spirit.
This workshop was staged by Partageons le Monde, or Share the World, an organization that promotes learning across cultures. The idea of sending kids back to school during a pandemic makes many parents uneasy. So, with some help, Partageons le Monde brings learning to them.
So, really, the older people, you're not going to get much return. But the young ones, you get maximum return.
Mayo brought along items he feels are significant. The Iroquois Confederacy flag.
So this is the symbol of the people of the great law of peace. Where the law is, we provide for our children. This world is very complex. A lot of stuff in this world. It's not so easy to figure out how to make peace.
A turtle rattle.
The year is divided into 13 equal parts because in the year, there are 13 moons.
And perhaps most importantly...
So this thing, what you're seeing right here, this is what is identified as the two-row wampum peace treaty. It's what established peace between my ancestors and your ancestors.
An explanation about the great law of peace, a historical agreement largely forgotten in today's white society.
See, feel, go like that, roll it in your fingers. That's where you are. You're in there. And I'm in here too. So we have to take care of each other.
Aside from learning history and a bit of science.
Right here. What direction does the sun set? West. Okay.
There was an arts component as well.
We are going to make a little wampum.
These kids even strung together a mini two-row wampum all their own. Quebec is often criticized for the way its schools present Indigenous history. Kids often end up with more questions than answers.
Of course, there's no hope in the political systems. There's no hope in the education systems. Where there is hope is where you have access to the young people to be able to share with them the realities of creation.
Reviving traditions of the past in the present, he says, is the best way to fill in the gaps. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
It's time for another quick break, but coming up, a look at reconciliation through theatre. Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta, 20 above in Fort McMurray and Peace River, 24 and some sun in Red Deer, 29 in Lethbridge, sunny skies for some of the west coast, 30 above in Penticton, 31 in Kamloops, 19 and some rain in Prince George, 17 above in Fort Nelson. In the Yukon, 12 degrees and rain in Whitehorse and Watson Lake. Over to the NWT, 14 above in Trout Lake, 15 in Fort Simpson. 13 and a mix of sun and cloud in Colville Lake, 14 in Fort McPherson. In Nunavut, 10 above in Repulse Bay, 12 in Arviat. 13 degrees in Iqaluit, 12 in Clyde River. Live theater is back in Winnipeg, or at least a scaled-back version of it is. A new play examining what reconciliation looks like through the eyes of Indigenous youth debuted in the city this week. Here is more on that.
I'll take reconciliation for 200, Aaron.
Are you sure?
The voices of more than 70 Indigenous youth in Winnipeg make up a new theater production called Sangodeowin. The final piece is the result of 2 years of interviews with youth on what reconciliation looks like to them.
This play, I think, gives non-Indigenous people an insight into what it's really like to be a youth, an Indigenous youth, today, especially in Winnipeg.
Tracy Niepenak directed the play, which was supposed to hit the stage in May, but was delayed due to the pandemic. Local theater company Sarasvati produced the piece. They partnered with 7 organizations and guest artists to host workshops for Indigenous youth. Through this, the youth created stories of how they interact with the world around them. Niepenak says the release of the play is timely.
There's a lot of strength to their voices and really eye-opening. And I think in light of like the pandemic and the riots, all of these things like really hit the ears in a different way than maybe before all of it happened.
Braden Houle is one of the actors tasked with bringing the stories to life. He says it's been an honor to be a part of this storytelling.
Truth and reconciliation has been talked about for a number of years, but now it's finally starting to become something that everyone is trying to understand now. And it's just nice to be able to talk about reconciliation just through acting.
The original production was supposed to have a crew of elders, dancers, and singers, but had to be scaled down to 6 performers because of physical distancing. Performances were open to a small group of ticket holders, but were also being streamed online for a small price.
I think everyone is just happy that we're like being on stage again, and because we haven't had theater, we've all been like quarantined for a number of months.
The last performance is taking place Thursday evening. And that's your APTN National News for this Thursday, August 27th. We now leave you with a healing prayer song. Zane Wade made a stop at Bow Valley Provincial Park to sing a song for his mother, Teresa Wade, who is currently in hospital. And Brittany Hobson, take care, stay safe, and have a good evening.